What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, a podcast dedicated to destroying your self-limitations and helping you achieve the dream life. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and for everybody listening or watching today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast, as you can see, I got my new friend Brigham Dallas sitting next to me. And just for everyone out there who's never heard of Brigham Dallas, I'm going to give you a quick update on who he is. So Brigham, he started a Brazilian waxing chain with currently 14 locations in the Arizona area. He's also started a national franchise of Hello Sugar, which he will speak on in today's episode. He did all of this with less than $3,000 invested into the business, and now it's currently scaling in the tens of millions yearly. And another fun fact about Brigham, he is an avid salsa dancer, which he could speak on a little bit in today's episode. He loves world traveling, and he speaks 3 different languages. So guys, Brigham in today's episode is going to be dropping a lot of wisdom for personal life as far as traveling, some of the experiences he's learned, as well as some of the early lessons, some of the failures, and the successes he had in his businesses. And he did all this. This is seriously the coolest fact. He did all of this with less than $3,000 invested. And so if anyone could do it, Brigham is going to tell you how you could be one of those people. So Brigham, thanks for joining us on today's episode.
What's good, Brandon? What's good, podcast listeners? Good to be on the show, and thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, and I guess before we jump full force into it, tell us a little bit about the salsa dancing. Where does that one come from?
Oh, geez. Yeah. So like when I was younger, I was in a relationship, had a hard time with it, and I just needed to get out. So part of my traveling was I just needed an escape to get away from life for a little bit to heal. And I moved to an island in Africa called Tenerife. It's part of the Canary Islands. And salsa dancing was really big there. And that just became my like total fix and focus for the next 6 months while I was healing and stuff. And I just dove into it and just fell in love with the dance, with the language and everything out there. And it was a really good way for me to get over a hard thing in my life.
And were you an avid dancer beforehand, or you just saw people in the culture going for it, so you're just let's try this out?
A lot of it was I needed friends. I had started a new place. I didn't know anyone, and I needed to make friends. And with salsa dancing, it's kind of like most sports, you see the same people every week. You are always in the connection. You're instant friendship and connection with people, even if they don't speak English, because a lot of them were just all Spanish speakers at the time. And I made friends really quickly. And so that was self-promulgating. I had something difficult that I could focus my energies on. And and it just became a real big passion of mine. And since then I've traveled to a lot of different countries with it. And my biggest thing is I used to live in Barcelona, and I was taking lessons from the world champions for a while.
There you go.
It was really fun time.
That is awesome. Well, guys, like I said, Brigham is going to be sharing so much knowledge. Those fun little stories he just shared is just a small blip of what we're going to be hearing in today's episode. So with that all being said, let's jump into it. So Brigham, I want to start off on today's episode of the Get Over Yourself podcast. We got a little bit of a framework of who you are and kind of what makes you tick, but you have a very interesting journey where while you were in college, you got to experience a couple different cultures, and you weren't necessarily the typical college student who gets in and graduates within the 4 years and checks all the boxes, does all the classes. You had an interesting journey while you're in college, so you want to start with that?
Yeah, I kind of want to start with where the journey came from. So I was at school. It was homogenous, monotonous. It was the same thing. I'm learning things and I enjoyed learning, but I kind of just felt stuck in life. And I don't know if you've ever had this, Brandon, where this thought that just keeps coming to your mind and won't leave. You ever had that? It's just this persistent thought.
Yeah. And you're trying to figure out what do I want to do with it, and where's the thought even stemming from, kind of?
Yeah. And why do I keep having this thought? Right. And that's what it was for me. Initially, it's for a business. And so one part of the year, I wanted a business more than a girlfriend at the time. I just really wanted a business. And I started my first company. It was an online e-commerce store selling stupid, but fishing worms. And why fishing worms is because it rained one day and a fishing worm was on the ground. And I was like, maybe I can do this. And I looked online and I found that there's not that many people selling. So anyways, I started this fishing worm business. But then after I got it up and going, I couldn't have this thought leave. And it was, you gotta go experience the world. You gotta get out. You gotta get out. And so I wasn't making a lot of money from this fishing worm business, but I was making enough to live. And so I dropped out of school, bought a one-way ticket to Thailand, and started living out of a bungalow for a little while. And that's like really what launched me into my like, it was like, if you remember the old 80s like Star Wars movies, like Yoda and Luke Skywalker on that like like little island with rainforest, that was it for me. I stumbled into this like bungalow, and next to me on my neighbor was an SEO specialist, this guy that just improves rankings of websites. So all day long I would talk to him, figure out what he did, learn the business, and started learning myself because you can't pick coconuts for a living, and worms weren't really doing it for me. So I needed something else to get by. So that's kind of like what launched me into starting this like world traveling and just like getting out of my narrow-minded school focus.
And I want to highlight this too for everybody out there. His first business was worms.
Yeah.
Let that sink in for a second. It was worms. He looked at the ground one day and he saw a worm. He said, all right, let's try and make this work. I feel like so many people nowadays, and I understand it is difficult to get a business up and going. You put that in very simple terms. Obviously, there's a lot more of a process into it on how you first started that e-commerce worm store. But at the same time, it's like, guys, what's stopping you from just going out and doing something? He saw a worm on the ground. He said, all right, there's a business opportunity. There's so many of these little opportunities, these little insights that God gives us every single day. He puts it right in front of our faces. It's just a matter of not if we're going to act on it. And in this case, Brigham, you did. And then you said, all right, now that I have this worm business, it's going to sustain me enough at least to live outside the US for a little bit. I'm going to move to Thailand. And by the way, how on earth did you have a bungalow right next to this guy who's worth millions if you're just making a tiny bit of money at the time?
He wasn't worth millions. This guy was living in like the cheap life like me. He just like liked small, simple life. I'm sure he was making enough to like have a good wealth, like to live.
Was he American as well, or?
He was British.
Okay.
Yeah,
and he just
British.
decided on Thailand just like you, just tried out.
Yeah, like I think the universe kind of puts you in paths of people that are similar when you get outside of your own comfort zone, right? So
Okay.
like there's a lot of people that live in these foreign countries like Indonesia, Thailand's a good one, Vietnam's there, where they're just remote working. And it's not hard to meet these kind of people. The internet's good, the life is cheap, you don't need much to survive, and it's just an incubator for these like different world thinkers out there. So it was really cool. Like I look at it back and I'm like, how in the world did I stumble upon him? But it's not that uncommon when you look at like where people are attracted to in this profession.
That makes total sense. I picture myself when I've gone abroad, when I lived in Brazil for a while. And it's easy when you're speaking English and everyone around you at the time is speaking a completely different language. 100%. You hear English and you turn your head and you go, oh, somebody I actually know, you start making the connections to that.
Yeah, totally.
So what happens after you start talking to this man who is prophetic when it comes to SEO? He knows everything about it.
Yeah. So I was like, I need something to keep me going besides this. And so I started doing a Google Ads company. So he did SEO. I started doing PPC, pay-per-click advertising. And pay-per-click was kind of like a sister thing to the Google organic side. So I started building this up. And for those of you that are thinking about what to start, you kind of break it down into two categories. You got service businesses and product businesses. Product businesses cost money. Service businesses are you do something, which usually doesn't cost money, and you get paid for it. So if you have no money and you don't have things to invest, a service business is a lot easier, faster route to start than a product business, right? And I was just a middleman. I just found somebody who was really good at PPC. And then I found clients and then used that guy who's really good at PPC to do the work. So I was called white labeling. You have an expert in something, you label it as your own company, and then you go out and find the clients. And I could do that within one day. Like literally, if I could just find the clients, I could go. So with the connection with him, and there's another SEO guy at the time I connected with, they brought me my first business. They did not do PPC. So I was like, okay, maybe I can, kick back a little bit to him, send some money over to my employee or just my guy that I'm working with, and then I can make a little bit to live off and learn the business. And over the next year, there'd be questions like, what's your CPA? What's your CPL? What's your conversion rate? What is the optimization strategy here? And every time, my default was, Brandon, that's a great question. Let me do a little research and really get back to you with that. Like, that was just my go-to. Like, I have no idea what the answer to this is.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah, and I'll go figure it out. And so then I'd go Google what is a conversion rate, and fake it till you make it kind of was my strategy on that. Or I'd ask my professional I was working with, what's a good conversion rate? What does that even mean? What is he talking about? And I go back and I give some really detailed answer. Oh yeah, thank you for that. And it was just like the default. I don't know, but I wouldn't say I don't know. I'd just say, let me get some time to really give you a good answer on this. And I built a business that way. So my first like real like funds came from a service business where I wasn't the expert, but I white labeled something else from somebody and then used the contacts I had to leverage to find clients.
And within this context, was it hard to find the clients when you still didn't know a ton about what you're talking about, or what was kind of the process?
People generally that are referred to you have trust, right? So the first step was he had a large following. They had a need for PPC. He liked the idea that I was going to give him a kickback. And so he was willing to share my stuff with him, and it helped me get a start. And in the beginning, it wasn't a lot, um, but over time, I started, finding everything I could. I scoured Craigslist. I asked my friends. I asked my friends' friends. I asked my clients for recommendations, and it was a slow grind, right? But over time, I just built a clientele from word of mouth.
That makes perfect sense. And it seems like that same theory is kind of how you've been doing every business practice since. Obviously, there's a little bit more a little bit more of a process when it comes to it. But have you kind of stuck with that same framework, or has it changed at all?
The theory here is start really small, improve the model, and then build it.
Right.
That's the theory about all of this. So it's easy to say, hey, I can make a lot of money if I just do these things and scale it that way. But you're skipping assumptions. And so, like, if you want to jump to Hello Sugar, I started when I was 26, and it was a Brazilian waxing salon. I knew nothing about Brazilian waxing. So in the same vein, like, this wasn't a business that I had a lot of professional experience with, or would I ever have professional experience with Brazilian waxing? Like, it was never something that like I was passionate about, but I loved the economics of it. So I loved that people come back every month. Recurring business models are always good. I love that. I love that the price is very high. The margin is good. The margin is between 20 to 35%, depending on how much volume you're doing. And I really love that there was a lot of territory to take over in Phoenix, because your market is 20 to 40-year-old females, and there's a lot of those in a big market like Phoenix. So all of those kind of like check the boxes. Now I just need to find a professional. Again, same kind of concept. Find a professional to do the service, and then I would use my marketing skills from running a digital ads agency for years to actually market the business and build that up. So that was the PPC company was the training grounds to build my own business. And I was always thinking, marketing is a good thing to get into because that allows me to learn the skills to eventually do this for myself.
Definitely. And obviously, Hello Sugar's become a very, very successful company. Maybe you could speak to the numbers real quick just so people understand how successful it has become.
Well, yeah, thanks. We started off 2015. I had one location. I started for $3,000. So it was a 10 by 10 studio. Again, testing the thesis, right? The thesis was that I could find clients for this in a market like Phoenix. And I didn't build a big studio. I just rented a room in the back of a friend's private plastic surgery office. And then I found like a salon suite, and it was a 10 by 10 room. It wasn't big. And once I proved that model out, that's when I built an actual large location. So a principle here is start small, start smaller, be creative to be able to start smaller than you think. And your goal isn't you necessarily make money. Your goal is prove the model, because there's things that you don't understand that you're missing right now that you haven't proven out before you launch this at a larger scale. And I can give you an example of a failure on that in a little bit. But, in terms of this, we started with one, built it, grew it, proved it. Then I used that to build a flagship, which was $120,000. It was a huge, it was like all my life savings and all my credit cards and all my debt I could possibly max out. Right? Like, this was to me like a monumental task. And then from there, I started another salon suite, $10,000 to start a salon suite, built the model, built the flagship after that, and then kept on going from there. Now I've got 14 locations in Phoenix. We're doing about close to 10 million a year in revenue in Phoenix. And 2 years ago, I started a franchise where we take the same model and then replicate it across the country. And now there's 75 units in the franchise, and it's growing like astronomically fast. It's been really fun.
Are you guys in all 50 states yet, or are you just trying to stick to certain areas?
There's certain states I'm going to avoid, like California, New York. We're in 13 to 14 states right now.
Is that just because there's like a lot of competition, or just the taxes that come with it? I mean, I'm from California. I know how expensive it is.
labor costs are the highest.
Labor costs, okay.
Yeah, and like lawsuit possibilities, and it's just a dangerous market to play in if you're not large.
Just not worth it. Not worth the risk.
Yeah, and then touching on this as well, like the amount of work that it took to start Hello Sugar Unit 1 was a massive amount. It took me a year to really get this off the ground. The amount of work to start unit number 14, flip of a switch, right? So this is where franchising, like if you're kind of like that middle entrepreneur, the entrepreneur type, where you just don't know what to do, you don't know if like doing your own business is for you, start a franchise, because there's a ton of economies of scale that came on unit 14, 15, 16. We've already figured out the strategy, the success of this, we already know it works and we already know what to do to make it work. So starting another location is very easy, and that minimizes the risk. The banks like it more. The banks are going to loan you money for a franchise and they won't loan for a regular business. And you're going to be up and running a lot faster. So, and then you're going to learn skills, kind of like I did with my PPC company, where like I was learning from other people. You're going to learn skills about business that you have never used or implemented before that would help you later on start other businesses. So
Definitely.
I think franchise route's a great route to go to.
No, franchising. I'm going to throw this out there. I used to be a strong hater of franchising. I
Yeah.
always thought, why on earth would I work, especially if I'm not the franchise owner to begin with? In your case, you were the one kind of the head honcho behind it all.
Yeah.
I used to not understand it. And then I want to say about a month ago, I actually was in a growth lecture series, and a guy who has just worked on thousands and thousands of franchises, he comes in and speaks. I was like, boom, my mindset on franchises has changed astronomically.
Yeah.
That's a whole different topic, though. We could speak on that on another time. I actually want to take a step back from the business realm for a second and go back to more of your travel side. So you obviously, you went to Thailand when you were in college, and then, you kind of drop out for a little bit and you go get that done. But you've also lived in, how many, is it 4 continents now?
Yeah, I've lived in probably 10 or so different places. I've lived in Spain, Belgium, Ireland. I've lived in Thailand, Indonesia, China. I've lived in Colombia, Brazil. I've spent some time in a lot of different countries, at least 2 to 3 months at a time to a year at a time, throughout my travels.
And is that simply just to experience different cultures? Or I know you said one day when you're, especially for the Thailand one, you're like, okay, I just have this feeling. I got this itch. I got to go scratch it. I'm going.
Yeah.
But has that just been like, it stuck with you, the travel bug, or are you going there for specific business purposes? Like, why is it?
Yeah, the travel bug's part, like that adventurous spirit is a lot of it. Like I want to be able to see and learn and grow on cultures and learn new things about people and how the world ticks. But I'll tell you, like, it's not for everyone. Everyone sees this Instagram worthy like scenario and they think that that's what it's going to be like, and it's very different. And I'll tell you, if you're one of those like, hey, I'm going to drop out of school, I'm going to go travel for a long time, you've got to have purpose when you travel. And the purpose is not necessarily location X. That might just be like a facilitation of whatever your purpose is. But you really need to look at something and say, I've got 2 to 3 months here before my visa runs out. What can I accomplish in this time period? One specific thing that would make a lifelong difference in my life. Like what could I learn in this time period that could actually like be super beneficial for me over the long run? And so I took that approach to every country I went to. And it was kind of like leveling up in World of Warcraft, like you're going out to a place, you're battling monsters, and then you kind of grow. Like that's kind of like what it felt like. So like, for example, like I went somewhere and I was like, I need to know how to edit videos so that I can build a business that can have videos in it. And I went and I spent 3 months learning video editing skills, and I practiced and I built a video. Or I learned how to speak Spanish. I learned how to salsa dance. I mean, these are like life skill things that helped me later on. Or like I read, like when I had that like huge breakup, I was like, what am I doing wrong in relationships? Like what can I learn about myself that would make me stronger at relationships? And then I'm just obsessed over this one thing for the next 3 months until at the end of it, you look back and say, did I accomplish this or not? And by really focusing on like one specific goal and not like, oh, I'm just going to do a bunch of things, like hyper focused on this is what creates that success. Like do one thing and do it really well for that time period. And then at the end of it, you've either acquired this really cool skill or you leave and you look back and you're a little bit wanting in your life,
So would you consider yourself kind of a jack of all trades? It seems like you were becoming an expert, but I don't know. Would you be considered an expert if it's, you're devoting pretty much every waking second in the 3 months to, like you said, learn video editing or whatever it may be, but
yeah, it's a good question. I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to wear many hats. You have to do a lot of things well. Or you need to know how to hire, and you need to have the funds to hire. But in the beginning, you're poor, so you don't have the funds to hire. So you have to be a jack of all trades. But by I just have an obsessive personality. Like there's a lot of times where I'm like, I can't start this. Like I can't start rock climbing because I'll just like fill my time with rock climbing and I'll obsess over this thing. So I can't even touch it. Like I'm not going to drink a sip of alcohol because I'll be a binger, kind of like, but with that principle within activities, right? Or things. And there's a layer of this. It's like, how deep do I need to go to really make an impact on my life? like with relationships, it was like, I need to go deep. I really need to understand this and like deconstruct a lot of things to become better as a person. And I don't know, to really fulfill life. Because you think about it, like relationships are the thing that brings you the most happiness, right? Like you could have a really good career and a sucky relationship and your life sucks. And second to that's health. So I've also spent like a lot of time just studying life hacks on health and trying to make sure that I'm like really at peak performance.
And now that you've kind of taken a step back from at least living abroad, you've been here in the US for quite some time now where you're staying, you still travel and whatnot, but have you noticed any differences in as far as your own mental health? Do you feel more calm living here, or does it seem a little bit more hectic? I'm curious what the difference is, having
That's
lived
a
in
good
so many
question. I
places.
actually still travel very frequently. So I spend about 4 to 5 months a year out of the States.
Wow. And
Yeah.
is that
So
in one specific location each time,
no.
or?
Like this summer we were in Asia for 2 months. We did like a couple of countries out there, and then we spent a little bit of time in Europe.
Okay.
So this year is like 3.5. I mean, with the franchise growing as fast as it is, I can't spend that much time like I used to. But yeah, I still spend. I mean, last year was like 4 months. The year before was like 5.5 months. Like it's still a decent amount of time like traveling, and I've done that
So
for the past 10, 12 years.
that's actually, you bring up a very interesting point. You said now that the franchise is growing so much, you can't travel as much
Yeah,
currently. I mean, obviously the
yeah,
goal in the future is to have it fully automated so you don't have to touch it. I'm assuming, unless you like getting it, your hands dirty a little bit. But for anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur, I think kind of the step-by-step picturesque version is you start working on something, you learn it, like you said, you become that jack of all trades, you start learning the process, you dedicate tons of time, effort, money. And once again, this is just kind of the picture version,
yeah,
but you put in all this effort for it, and then eventually it grows out and out and out until you can finally be successful. And then when you're 50 or 60 and the business did really well, then you can start relaxing and enjoying your money and enjoying your time. But you're putting kind of the exact opposite spin on it, where you're like, no, I went out and did all the traveling, I had all the fun, and I learned while doing it. Like traveling wasn't purely just going on a vacation, but it was a learning experience. And then you started building from there. It seems like you kind of flipped the script on what most people do.
yeah. I mean, again, now you need to define what a travel looks like for people. And if you have the idea that traveling is a vacation, then that's not really the way that I think millennials and Gen Z should look at traveling. I think that's the way our parents look at traveling, but not us. I see traveling as just part of the experience of life. Like it's so crazy now. I mean, I'm on a flight every week, so it's so crazy to think. But like for me, home and abroad have very minimal amounts of stress differences. Like I'm just like, okay, where am I sleeping tomorrow? And I have to be in that spot. And with the franchise, like, and I'll tell you this, like most entrepreneurs that are highly successful, their minds never stop. There is no break. There's no vacation. There's no, I need to take a step back from this. They like live in stress because there's a level of stress that's necessary just to maintain like this feeling of like of movement. Like there has to be movement in your life. Like high functioning people have that. Um, and so like I don't know. It's like traveling is not a vacation. I never have seen it as like the vacation. I have a mission when I travel, and the mission is generally very purpose driven. It's not like, hey, let's go see this really cool site. I mean, that's part of the experience, but there's always something behind it that's more important. And I would say like anyone who's looking to start a business, like traveling is like something you should highly consider as part of that process.
And it's kind of interesting you mentioned that as well. I've So I went on my honeymoon to the Dominican Republic, and me and
Nice.
my wife did like the typical American version of the Dominican Republic, right? We stay in a nice
Yeah.
resort, we're being waited on. Even when we
Yeah.
leave to go do these tours, it's like the Americanized version. Don't get me wrong, there's definitely a time and place for that. For my honeymoon, that was perfect. But I've been to
Mhm.
these other fun places. When I lived in Brazil, I was doing missionary work, so I was in the thick of it. I was living, where all the Brazilians lived. I was talking with them. I was speaking their language. I was eating their food. I wasn't doing the
Yeah.
American version. On other efforts, I have a friend who lives in Hawaii. I didn't do the tourist version of Hawaii where you go stay in the nice hotel and you do these fun tours. No, like I got with the locals. I got to go hang out with them. I experienced some of their culture. And same with a friend of mine who lives in Alaska. And like I realize these aren't like necessarily places abroad, but what you're saying is completely true. Some of my best vacations have been the ones where I'm like experiencing what it actually is like to be part of that region or that culture. And it's so amazing because you learn so much. Some of these people, their outlooks on life are just like so peculiar to me, where I'm like, but no, you're doing it right. And has there been a specific culture that you've like become obsessed with where you're like, I wish more Americans could adopt this?
Spanish culture. I love the Spanish culture. I love the idea of tapas, small plates. I love the idea of siestas, of spending time with people, of a late dinner where you're just relaxing and talking to people. And I love the idea of the salsa lifestyle and the dancing and the cultures. Like I'm obsessed with like Spanish culture. But that's a good point too. And like I kind of want to direct like that thought process, Brandon, of like of business and like the conception of businesses. So like a lot of my best ideas have come traveling because I'm out of the day to day. And a lot of times when you want to start something, you need to leave the experience that you're having, the routine tasks that you're currently having, to allow your mind to open up to new ideas and opportunities to really have that clarity to move forward. And so traveling, a lot of times, like if you don't have an idea, you don't know what you want to do, just go travel. Just make that your like go travel, experience the world, and make your mission to just talk to as many people as possible. You'll meet a lot of interesting people, you'll get a lot of ideas, and make your mission to figure out what you want to do as a business. You'll find it. You'll find it in that traveling. And it might not be you find some idea and you copy it, but it might be that this idea is tangential to your path and your purpose. And allowing your mind to open up by not being constrained by the routine that you currently have will allow you to see like clearly enough to start that business and find that mission.
And it also makes me think like I bet when you've done your traveling, you've also met a lot of people and a lot of lifestyles where you think, I don't want to be like that. Kind of the opposite effect. Have you had any cases like that?
For sure, for sure. I think the biggest ones are like I think location dependent. Like you see some beautiful places, some beautiful people. See the other side, and you're like, you can choose to live in a place that's not like this. Like, where do you want to live? I want to live in Phoenix. I live in Phoenix because I want to live in Phoenix, right? I mean, I know it's like a crazy desert and everything, but we leave in the summertime, and the winters are beautiful, and it has all the things that I want in the city. So like, learning that you don't have to live a life that's like funneled into this path that other people are creating for you. And that's like the life of action versus trauma, right? Like, are you going to be reactive to your environment? Are you going to be the one that says, oh, I have to do this because this pressure is on me? Or are you going to be the doer that comes out and says, this is what I want? How do I make that happen? How do I change my lifestyle and my perspective to do those things? The true entrepreneurs, the ones that really are successful, are the ones that are acting on life and not reacting to what circumstances are put in their path.
Most definitely. I 100% agree. And since we're coming up close to the time where we got to close out, I want to wrap up with a couple other questions before we finalize everything here. Obviously, it seems like traveling has been one of the biggest benefits inside of your life. It taught you a lot of lessons. You've met some amazing people, kind of given you inspiration towards the businesses you've run. Have you? I mean, when you first started traveling, you were a college student. You probably didn't have that much money. How do people travel for cheap? Anyone who's kind of in this age range, 18 to 30, who may not have a lot of money behind them, but they want to do these experiences you've been talking about. How do they do it? Where do they get started?
Yeah, great freaking question. Okay, so a couple of things to do. Number one is you have to like broaden your time frame of travel. So everything becomes cheaper when you're living somewhere instead of vacationing somewhere, right? So you go find a place you can stay for 1 to 2 months. The housing becomes a lot cheaper, and maybe you find like a good central hub and you do vacation trips off of that hub. So like for example, if you lived in Medellin, within 2 to 3 hours, there's tons of hikes and cool things to do in that city, or within Medellin, the city itself, it'd be cool. Number two, find a cheap place. So some examples of this are going to be Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. I mean, those are great places to start if you haven't done anything there. But it's also in a different time zone, so it's really hard to work U.S. hours when you're doing it in the middle of the night. So if you want something more like relevant, I think Colombia is a great place. Argentina is a fantastic place. It's cheap. It's so cheap when you have American money. So pick a place that's really cheap to live. The third thing is don't drink alcohol. It's going to be like double your budget from food, or minimize that if you can. Like that saved me a lot of money over the years. It's just not drinking. And then the fourth thing is limit the amount of like places you go. So it's just like stay in a spot. Don't go to a lot of places. Kind of like you're gonna spend more money just by having to travel. And you go get food somewhere and it's like crap. I have to eat this expensive meal because of that. And like I probably lived off of $2,000 a month. That's like when I was really poor, I was living off of $1,200 a month in Thailand. But when I was living comfortably, it was like 2,000 a month. Obviously, now that the business is doing better, like that's changed a little bit at this point. But you could do it. You could do it for 2,000 or less a month.
Definitely. And now, once again, jumping back over to the business side before we close out today's episode, I want to ask you you were starting brand spanking fresh. I mean, you already told us you started with the worms and then you
Yeah.
grew onto this Brazilian waxing, which you didn't know a lot about, but you kind of just went for it. If you were, say, 20 years old and you're trying to figure out what you wanted to do, you knew you wanted to start a business, but you weren't sure the first couple steps, where would you begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. Uh, Idea generation, I would write down some rules of business that are important to you to have, like, just like you would like if you're dating someone, right? Like, think of a business as if someone you're going to date. With dating, you're like, hey, I want somebody that's athletic. I want somebody smart. They got a good family. I want somebody physically attractive. You have all these checklists. We should do the same thing with businesses, not just that it makes money. Because what I learned over the years of starting businesses is that the same amount of time that you put into business A is going to be the same amount of time you put into business B, and they might have wildly different success trajectories. Like, just building a business, no matter what it is going to take way more time than you think. So you might as well focus your time on something that's going to hit all those check marks. And for me, if I were looking at a business today, these are the things I would look for. One is total addressable market is high, like a massive amount of scale. Two is, do the employees that I hire, because I will be hiring employees, I don't want to trade time for money. Do the employees that I hire, are they looking for a job or a career? Because I don't want a lot of high turnover. Jobs, dime a dozen, you can get them everywhere, but they're hard to keep. And you're constantly hiring and having to deal with that headache of that process. Three, does the business have a high degree of variability? Or is the business something that I could simply explain to a child? What do you do? This is what we do. How do you do it? This is how it's done. It's very simple. I don't want a sushi restaurant. I got to fly sushi in and fish in every day, and the demands are going to be different. And like, I don't want something that has a high degree of variable to it. I want something simple, because simple businesses are easier to operate. And four, is there continuity of the customers? So do the customers come back month over month? I want that. I want something that I'm not going to have to market to somebody new every single time. And then five, what does the margin on this business look like? And if you could check all of those boxes, and by the way, for a margin, I'm seeking 35%. You're really rarely going to get 35%, but if you could see a way to have a 35% margin, when you add in all those incidentals, we'll call them, you might end up with a 25% margin. And that's very healthy for a business. Whereas if you shoot for like a 20 or 15% margin, you might end up with a 5 to 10% margin. And that's not very healthy for a business. That's not going to weather the downturns and tides of the storms. And so if you have those five things, again, so total addressable market, continuity, simple career, not a job, simple variables, and then the margin being about 35%, that's like where I would start when I start looking for a business. And if you just have no idea, go to like Entrepreneur Magazine, look at like all the franchises out there, and just go interview some and see what is interesting to you. Or heck, come talk to us at Hello Sugar as well. We're always interested in new franchise owners.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brigham. And guys, if you actually want to reach out to Brigham, in the description down below, you're going to be able to reach out to him via email. I'll link all of his socials and whatnot so you guys can check him out. It's brighamdallas@gmail.com, right?
That's it.
Perfect.
Super
yeah.
simple.
So yeah, if you guys want to check him out, get any kind of preference or questions that you need to direct his way, he'd be more than happy to help you guys out. And Brigham, thank you. I mean, between the traveling, between the business, I feel like this has been a super insightful episode. But before we close out, as all my listeners on the Get Over Yourself podcast know, I like to close out my episode with the same question every single time. And it's this. Brigham, if the entire world could hear you right now, every single person here on this planet, and they could understand exactly what you were saying, what one piece of advice would you give them, and why would that be?
Yeah, my advice would be seek happiness and know what it is that brings you happiness. Don't chase money. Don't chase like a job. Chase happiness. Find out what that silo is for you, and really define it for yourself. And then once you define it, construct your life around seeking that happiness.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Brigham. Guys, as always, make sure to leave a positive review on today's episode if you found anything impactful. Also, if you know anyone who could potentially benefit from hearing our conversation today, continue on sharing it with them, because that is the biggest way that I market so I can find new listeners on the Get Over Yourself podcast. It would mean the world to me. But yeah, guys, thank you, Brigham, once again. Thank you, everyone, for listening to today's episode. If you need to contact Brigham, like I mentioned beforehand, it'll be in the description down below. And with that all being said, just take a step back. It'll all be okay. And start finding where you can create your own happiness inside of your life.